We are going to be talking about a short passage in Genesis 21. And over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of been building into this moment through the life of Abram, who has now become Abraham. And so if you're taking notes tonight, I did title my sermon, There Is No Doubt. There is no doubt. So in Genesis chapter 12, we preached this several weeks ago. God promises to Abram, not Abraham yet, promises to Abram that he would make him a great nation and that he would give his descendants the land of Canaan to inhabit. Now, the key thing about this is that in Genesis 11, right at the end, when it's given the genealogy of how we got to Abram, it actually drops a little nugget about Abram's wife, Sarai, and it says in the end of chapter 11 that she is barren. Okay, it drops that just kind of one sentence, throws it in there, so then when we hit Genesis 12, God gives a promise that doesn't look possible. He gives a promise that in the natural, it doesn't look obtainable. It doesn't look like there's anything there that could materialize. God gives a promise because God can see what we can't see, right? And God ultimately has promises and plans that He will do whatever He has to do to push it forward into the earth. And so what He's doing in Genesis 12 is selecting the bloodline that would come from Abram to ultimately get Jesus into the earth for you and me. He is choosing Abram. And so 3 different times from Genesis chapter 12 to Genesis chapter 17, God reaffirms His covenant with Abram. How many know sometimes you just got to repeat yourself? How many hate repeating yourself? I'll be honest, I'm on that list. I absolutely cannot stand having to repeat myself, right? But God reaffirms 3 separate times the covenant that He has made between Him and Abram. And so last week we talked about how in Genesis chapter 17, God is reaffirming His covenant, but then He does something to Abram. He changes his name from Abram to Abraham. And last week we talked about how in the Hebrew, all that changed was that the Hebrew letter He was added to the end. Now, this letter is significant because it's synonymous with also part of the name Yahweh, and it is almost interchangeable with the Spirit of God. That's what it means. So He is attaching the Spirit of God to Abram's life. And we talked about how when the Spirit of God gets attached to a believer's life, everything changes. We go from someone who's barren to someone who's creating nations. We go from somebody who's hopeless to being hopeful. Because when the Spirit of God gets attached to the believer, everything changes and we become something entirely different. And so we have to be Spirit-filled believers that believe when God gets involved in my life, when I give God access to my life, then anything I touch has the ability to change for the better. That every situation that I'm a part of has the ability to be corrected and made right in the eyes of God. So we talked about how our intellect, our talent, our ability can really only take us so far. But with the Spirit of God in our life, we become limitless. And here was one of the quotes from last week. If I become solely reliant on what I can do, I have lost my ability to have faith for what God can do. If I become solely reliant on my ability, what I bring to the table, I am losing all of my ability to trust God and to have faith that God can do exactly what He promised He would do. And what He would do would be fulfilled every single time. I will lose faith in that. And so last week I mentioned that Genesis 12 to where we're going to be at today, there is a 25-year stretch. 25 years from the moment God promised His descendant, the land to Abram's descendants, and that He would make him a great nation, to Genesis chapter 21, where Isaac the son is born. And we've already established that Abram, in Genesis 15, it says that Abram believed God. He had faith in God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. But the thing about Abram is that Abram was also willing to work at what was promised to him. He was willing to go the extra step. And so last week, we talked about everybody's favorite chapter in Genesis. We talked about circumcision, right? And how Abram was willing to do the cutting. He wasn't just saying, I believe this. He was willing to put it into practice. As painful as it could have been, as horrible as it could have been, but he didn't just do it for him. Everyone after him had to follow in the covenant of circumcision. So here's where we're going to be at tonight. Genesis chapter 21. We're going to start in verse 1. If you have your Bible, you can turn there. If not, it'll be on the screen. Here's what it says. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son that Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Verse 6, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And then she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have bore him a son in his old age. Lord, I just pray tonight that your word would go out. Lord, I pray tonight that in this room that you would help us to elevate our faith. Lord, help us to believe that you are exactly who you say you are. And Lord, if you say you are who you are, then Lord, I can believe that you'll do exactly what you said you'll do. So Lord, I pray tonight you'd speak to us and change our lives. And it's in Jesus' name, amen, amen. Now this is a pretty interesting section of text for me because in verse 6 it says that God gave her laughter. Now this isn't the first time that Sarah laughed. And it is recorded in Scripture the first time that she laughed because in Genesis chapter 18, Abram and Sarah have visitors come to their tent. Now, if you're a regular Wednesday night crewer, Pastor Curtis preached months ago on Genesis chapter 18 about being hospitable and hosting God because one of the visitors that was of the three was actually God. God showed up to their tent. And what happens is in the middle of this encounter, God asked Abraham, where is your wife? Where is Sarah? So here's what it says in Genesis 18, picking up in verse 10. It says, and then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the time of age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am this old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Verse 15, Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh, right? Come on, it's savage. Like, no, you did. You did. How many have ever heard the expression, and if you haven't, I don't know what rock you live under, how many have heard the expression, hindsight is 20/20, right? When you look back on something, you get the perfect picture of what it was. Have you ever gotten on the other side of something and realized that the whole time you were worrying, you really had nothing to worry about, right? Have you ever gotten on the other side of something and are almost embarrassed at how you acted in the middle of it? Anybody in the room? Well, listen, I'm going to tell on myself tonight, and I'm going to be honest. I'm living secondhand embarrassment telling you this story, and it's kind of dumb. So when I was in college, I went to Tennessee Tech for my first year of college, And at Christmas break, we got out. I didn't have class on Friday. I was exempt from my exam because I was a studious little boy, you know. And so I went home on a Thursday. Well, Thursday night, Sydney's mom is the music teacher at Walton Ferry Elementary School, so we went up there for a concert. You know, I was just trying to run game on Sydney, get her to like me still. We weren't engaged. We weren't even dating. I don't even know why I was there. I was just kind of like showed up, you know. So I go and I get an email like in the middle of the performance from the school saying that I had a bill due for tuition and that if I didn't get it paid, that I would not be able to attend in the spring, right? And so panic. All right, listen, I can gravitate towards the side of panic, all right? Sometimes if I feel like things aren't going well, panic button. So in the middle of the choir concert, I read the email and I started sweating, right? You ever been there? It's like, oh gosh. Like, I don't know what to do. And I start like, I can feel the tension rising up in me. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay this. The dorm closes tomorrow. So at Christmas break, they would put different codes into the door so that you couldn't get into the dorm while no one was there. I mean, that's smart, right? So I knew, I'm standing there, 18 years old, thinking, if I don't go tonight, I'm going to lose all my stuff. And so at this point, I'm like working myself up. Like these kids are up here singing, they're all out of key. I don't really know what that means, but I'm in the back and I'm like panicking. I'm like, I've got to get out of here. I got to go. And I remember telling Sydney, like, I got to go. Like, I'm going to lose all my stuff. I don't have the money to pay this. I'm in college. I don't have a job right now. I can't afford whatever the tuition is. You know, the thing that I didn't factor in was that one of the scholarships I had would release on certain dates. Okay, so the date that it was set to release was the next day. Okay, I was not factoring that in. And I was in full-out panic mode. I mean, I can remember, it is so embarrassing for me to think about because in that choir concert, I was acting like a complete nut. You ever acted like a nut before? I mean, just losing your mind. Like I'm panicking, I'm like fidgeting, I'm shaking, I can't even hold my phone right. I'm not even enjoying the choir concert anyway, you know what I'm saying? Like I just wasn't having a good time. And I remember like after the choir concert ended, they were all going to Chili's. That's our spot, you know? We were going to Chili's and I was like, I can't go. I gotta get back. I gotta go load my dorm up because I can't afford to go to school anymore. And so by the time I got home, my dad was like, why don't you just wait till tomorrow and drive up? It's logical, right? The dorm would still be open the next day. And then I remember waking up on Friday and realizing I got another email saying that they had received my scholarship payment, which means I acted like a nut for nothing. I acted like an absolute idiot in that choir concert over nothing. Right? And so the hindsight is 2020. I had nothing to worry about. And I'm telling you, I'm embarrassed talking about it right now. Like the secondhand I can't even watch shows like The Office because of the embarrassment that I feel. Like the whole Scott's Tots episode, can't do it because of the secondhand embarrassment that I feel. And so when I think about how dumb I was, and how I acted, I'm like, oh, I'm so ashamed, right? I'm just like carrying this cloud of shame with me because I acted ridiculous because I was worried about something that I had no business worrying about. I was concerned with something that I had no business spending brain power on and being worried about. That's what I love about Sarah. Like she's laughing in doubt. And then again in Genesis 21, she's like, the Lord has given me laughter, right? Like the hindsight of this is 2020. I was being negative and I had a bad attitude about this. But it's also interesting that Sarah's not the only one that laughed. Because last week we cut off right before these couple of verses. And here's what it says in Genesis chapter 17. It says in verse 15, it says, God also said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai, but call her Sarah. And I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her, so that she will be a mother, or be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Verse 17, Abraham fell on his face, or he fell face down, and he laughed. And he said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael, the son that he had through Hagar, might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. So both Sarah and Abraham have laughed. But there's a difference in the way that they laughed. And I think that you'll find that the difference can be noticed in the way that God responds to them. And scholars believe that the response from God that there is different, and it implies that what the meaning of their laugh was. And Abraham actually fell face down. It was a form of submission. He's falling face down before the Lord. And so it's believed that Abraham was laughing in delight. He was taking delight in God. But Sarah in chapter 18 was laughing in doubt. There is a difference in the way that we approach something when we approach it in delight or if we approach it in doubt. And so there's a difference in the way that they laugh. And here's why I think what the difference really is that Abraham believed God. Abraham had faith in God. In fact, here's what Paul writes to the church in Galatians chapter 3. He says, so also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Understand then that those who have faith are children of Abraham. Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. One translation puts Abraham, the father of faith. I almost feel like it would be doing Genesis a disservice for us to walk through all of these stories about Abraham and not take a moment to talk about how Abraham is set apart and different because Abraham was a man of faith. Abraham was someone who believed God for who he said he was to be. He was someone that when God said it, Abraham acted on it. And here's what I believe tonight. We have been called to be a people of faith, that when God gives a word, we act on it. We don't wait for all of our ducks to get in a row. We don't wait for all of the circumstances to line up just right. But when God speaks a word, we are a people of action. And last week we talked about Abraham, his obedience followed his faith. His ability to act on God's word followed the fact that he believed God. And I think for some of us, God has made promises to us. Maybe for some of us, God has given us dreams. He's put something in your heart. And if we're being honest, there have been some moments in between of getting that word to where we're at now that we've had some doubt. That we've thought to ourselves, I wonder if this is really even obtainable. I wonder if this could even actually come true for me. And we start to doubt, well, maybe I didn't even hear God in the first place. Maybe I missed it altogether. And when the circumstances don't look exactly ripe for what we're dreaming of, we start to really wonder, did God really speak to me? Did God really say that to me? But tonight, here's what I'm believing for. I'm believing that a lot of us are going to go from laughing in doubt to laughing in delight. That we're going to be able to look at the thing that God has promised us, the thing that God has spoken over us, and we're going to be able to delight ourselves in the Lord because we have found that He is faithful to us and He is trustworthy. And so tonight, I want to just, for the room, let us elevate our faith. I told you, it's time to dream again. It's time to believe again. It's time to hope again. It's time to sow seed into that thing again. It's time to revisit that thing again because God is faithful to us. And all through Genesis, Moses is trying to pin a theme to the Israelites who he's writing to in the wilderness. And it's this: even in your wilderness, God is trustworthy. Even in what you feel like is barren, God is trustworthy. And if he gives you a promise, he is trustworthy enough to see it through to the end. And he will work at that thing on your behalf so that you can see it. And so even in your wandering, he's trustworthy. Even in your wondering, he's trustworthy. And I've come to tell somebody tonight, even in your doubting, he is trustworthy. And God is not afraid of your doubt. God is not afraid of your worry. But our life of faith should recognize that God has brought me this far. He's not going to leave me here. And if God has done this much for me, he's not done with me. And if I still have breath in my body, if I still have something in me, God is not done with me. And that means I can have faith to believe if I'm still breathing and I'm still waking up in the morning, that this plan and this promise he's given me, he's still working it on his end. So my response to that as a person of faith is I'm going to work my side of it. I'm going to uphold my end of the bargain with this. So tonight I want to give you a couple key things that I believe a person of faith should see in faith. The first one, if you're taking notes, is that faith is worth the fight. Faith is worth the fight. You and I have to be able and willing to contend for the faith. We have to be willing to fight for what we believe. We have to be willing to choose a route that says, I'm not going to give up on that thing, that I'm going to contend for that thing in prayer, that I'm going to press in when nobody else is. Because here's what I have found. Sometimes faith looks ludicrous to people. Faith will look absolutely wild to people in your life. When you're believing God for a miracle and you're believing God for something that in the natural doesn't seem possible, people will think you're a nut. People will think that you are off your rocker. But you have to be willing to push through some of that. You have to be willing to fight for what you believe God spoke to you. Because sometimes when God tells us to build a boat, we will look like idiots. And you'll look like that until the rain starts to come down. He'll tell you to build a boat, and you might be the only one working at it, and people might ridicule you and say, how could you believe that? How could you work towards that? But when the rain starts coming, you will know I was faithful with what God gave me, and I was diligent with what God gave me. People may look at you like you are absolutely wild when you walk around and say, I'm going to be the father of nations, and my descendants will inherit this land, but all around you is barrenness. But when Isaac shows up, when the promise gets fulfilled, we have to recognize that when God gives us a word, it's worth fighting for. It's worth believing for. And it's worth praying about and pressing in about. And I come to break something. It's worth fasting over. It's worth doing things that nobody else wants to do because it is worth the fight. Listen, I am believing for what God's going to do in Hendersonville, but I can't just stand idly by and hope that everybody else will fight for it. If I want other people to fight for this with me, I've got to lead the charge in the fight, which means I have to pray like nobody else is praying. I've got to fast like nobody else is willing to fast because it's worth fighting for. And when God gives you a promise, you have to determine in your heart, I'm going to fight for this thing. I'm going to contend for this thing. Because if we really believe God spoke it, why would we not fight for that? If we really believe that God gave us that promise, why would we not dig our heels in and find a hill worth dying on and find a hill worth killing on? Because if we really believe he spoke it, nothing else matters. Nobody else's opinion matters. Nobody else's thoughts on the subject matters. Because when God spoke it, he is trustworthy to deliver his end of the bargain. And if I have found that he's trustworthy, he's worth fighting for. And that promise over my life is worth fighting for. Here's what I found. I found that it's worth looking like a fool. It is worth looking like a fool to everybody else. Because when God looks at my situation, he doesn't look at the odds. When God looks into my situation and what he's promised me, he's not looking at everybody's opinions. He's not looking at what things look like in the natural. What God is looking at the fact that he gave me a word and he wants to see what I'm willing to work at it for. And he wants to see if I am trustworthy with the word that he has given me. The second one tonight is that faith doesn't negate the natural. But faith looks through the natural and believes for what it would be when, not if, when God intervenes. That's what it means to have faith. And I know on the surface we're like, faith doesn't negate the natural. Well, what does that even mean? Pastor Herb, are you back here somewhere? Listen, Pastor Herb is a staple of Cornerstone. Right? Yeah, give it up for him. The one clap over here. Listen. If I told you that tonight after service in the lower commons, we have a ring set up and Pastor Herb and I are going to have a fight. Like we're going to have a boxing match. I get it. In the natural, all of your faith is right there. Right? In shape, A shape. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference in how we look. All right? And in the natural, doesn't look like I'm going to get very far. You know what I mean? This does not look like it's going to bode very well for me. Have you ever watched a boxing match or a UFC fight and they pull up the card and it's got everybody's statistics and they have an arrow of who it favors? All of them are this way, except for the weight, and it's this way. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just nothing working for me here. And so in the natural, when you see, first of all, specimen, the gloves and everything, it's intimidating. So when you see this in the natural, you're thinking, well, all my faith is there, right? But a person of faith looks in the natural and looks through it at if God is involved in that, what could it be? Or what could happen? If God intervenes in that, what could happen? You're good. If God intervenes, what could happen? Because give it up for Pastor Herb. Because in the natural, it looked like David would lose to Goliath. And by all accounts, all of the faith of both armies should have been in Goliath. But when God intervenes, all it takes is a smooth stone. Because God doesn't look at the natural. He's not bothered by us looking at the natural. But a person of faith looks in the natural and looks through it and imagines when God gets involved in this, what's going to happen. When God intervenes himself in this situation that looks barren on the surface and looks fruitless on the surface, what could happen? A faith-filled person looks at every situation and asks the question, perhaps God is with me. Even if I'm by myself, maybe, just maybe, somewhere in this journey, God's been walking with me. And God has promised me something. And if I'm a person of faith, I don't get bothered by the natural. I can see the natural. I can factor in the natural. But the natural doesn't get to dictate what I believe about God and what I have found to be true about God. A person of faith looks through it and imagines when God gets involved, what's going to change. And what is going to be the result of God getting involved? So faith doesn't negate the natural, but it looks through the natural and believes for what it would be if God gets involved. The last one is that faith is hopeful. Faith is hopeful. Here's what Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter says in verse 1. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. One translation says that faith is the assurance. The word assurance there, the word used for that actually means a firm foundation. It's actually something you can build your life upon. It's actually something that is concrete. It's something believable. It's something that you can grab a hold of. And I mentioned at the beginning that Abraham and Sarah have waited 25 years. They've waited 25 years since the moment God spoke to the moment that Isaac's born. And I can only imagine what it would be like. Listen, I can be an impatient person, right? When the fast food line's taking just a little too long, right? We all get on edge. Imagine waiting for 25 years for that, right? They waited 25 years and looking in the face of what everybody else was seeing as barren. But faith is hopeful. And when we are people of faith, we are hopeful for what God is going to do. And we believe that God said he would do it. And even if I don't hear another word, I still believe that he can do it. Even if he is silent in the middle of my battle, I can recognize I am hopeful. He said it, he'll do it. He promised it, he's going to come through. 25 years of trying to not get fixated on something. Here's the thing that we talked about over the last couple weeks. Abraham, in the middle of the 25 years, he tried to do things himself. When the promise didn't look like it was going to happen, Abraham would try to get himself involved. It doesn't ever say that he did not believe God. But somewhere in the middle of the 25 years, he was so expectant of it, he was trying to make it happen. 25 years of believing God for something and it just not quite working out. But a person of faith is hopeful in every situation. A person of faith, when the doctor's report doesn't look well, a person of faith stands in the gap and is hopeful. And we're a source of stability that if God is for us, who can be against us? And my God said he could heal, and I believe that he will heal. Here's what I want to encourage you with tonight. We need some people of faith in our life. We need some people of faith to surround ourselves with, because who wants to hang around a negative person? I want to hang around people that when I bring my dream before them or I tell them what I believe God has promised me, that they are people that speak hope into it and faith into it. Like, yeah, I'm with you. I believe God said that to you. I'm for you, because a faith person is hopeful. So how do we have faith? Right? I feel like that's the number one question on Christian Talk Radio. How do you have faith? Here's what I believe tonight. In order for us to have faith, we need to learn how to wait well. We need to learn how to wait well. How many people enjoy waiting? Anybody enjoy sitting in a waiting room? First of all, the thought of a waiting room in a doctor's office, it's awful. Ugh. Germs? No. I'd rather just not go to the doctor, because I feel like even if I wasn't sick, I'm going to get sick. You know what I mean? That's probably the whole ploy. You know what I mean? Same thing with the dentist, cavities. But how many of you have ever been in a grocery line? How many of you always pick the slow grocery line? How many of you in the middle of waiting on the grocery line changed lines at the faster one and that sucker slowed down when you got there? Anybody? Come on. That'll test your salvation right there. I tell you what else will test your salvation is the people that get in the self-checkout line with 100 items. Get saved, all right? And I'm pointing the fingers at me because I do that all the time. I'm convinced I can do a self-checkout quicker than anybody can do a normal checkout. I got the skills, right? I can scan and bag, scan and bag, scan and bag. Now, when the thing starts beeping because the weight sensor's off, it's a whole different problem. How many of you ever waited in a Disney park ride line? How many of you have ever waited for over an hour to ride something? I'll put my hand, listen. People start getting annoying. You start hearing people's breathing. You start hearing them smacking gum. And like, I'm already sensitive to it anyway, but there's somewhere in the middle of waiting where it just gets really obnoxious, right? I get really tired of hearing them. How many of you ever waited in traffic? How many of you waited in traffic on the way here tonight? Right? Waiting is a part of our life. How many of you ever waited on results before? I remember being in high school and taking the ACT and having to wait on the results to show up. I knew I didn't do well, but I had to wait on it anyway. You know what I mean? I had to wait around for the results to show up. How many of you have ever waited on fitness results? Yeah, we don't like that one, right? I want instantaneous success. I want to wake up looking like Pastor Herb. Like, I don't want the whole process. I don't want the waiting on the results. I just want the results. I just want to look the way that I want to look. How many of you ever put something on the calendar before and you're just looking forward to it so much that it feels like time slows down? Right? It feels like the whole year went really fast, but when we start thinking about Christmas, the next 60 days is an absolute crawl to get there. It feels like this is a never-ending waiting cycle, because waiting is a part of our life. And we have to learn how to wait well. We have to learn how to take our process well. Worship team, you can come join me. So how do we wait properly. I want to give you a couple thoughts, and then we're going to get into the altars and pray. We learn how to wait well by not forcing moves. We don't force moves. I said last week, have you ever tried to force God's hand before? Have you ever had that promise and that thing you were believing for, and you felt like maybe if I, do this, or I finagle this, or I work at it this angle, I can get this thing to happen for me? Have you ever encountered a line cutter? Nothing worse, right? Listen, somebody feels convicted in the house tonight. Nothing worse than a line cutter. So we went to Dollywood last week. Luckily, it rained, so the lines weren't very long. But we were standing in a line. There was one that you had to go up these stairs. So at the top of the stairs, you could look down at the rest of the line. And I was watching this group cut under the little things. First of all, I can't get that low, but God bless them. Like playing, is it limbo? Is that what that is? Like getting under the thing and cutting in front of people. And people weren't paying attention. People were on their phones. They're not paying attention. And then I would watch as the people would look up from their phone and were they there before? Right? And just that looks new, And they would time it just right to where when the line started moving, they would cut and they would move forward and it would look totally natural. I mean, I was impressed. But nothing is worse than a line cutter. Because a line cutter doesn't factor in how long it takes to get there, and they don't really care how many other people are waiting. They just want what's best for them. And I'm afraid sometimes that in our inability to wait, that we think we know what's best. And I do this all the time. I think I know best, so I try to cut the process or cut time off of the process or cut time off of the line that I'm having to wait in, when it's somewhere in the waiting that God is doing a work in me. And I have to realize that in order for me to have faith and believe God for everything, I have to learn to wait well, which means I don't force moves. What I'm really saying is, as a person of faith, what I really need to do is learn to take my hands off of the situation and believe that if God said it, that He will in fact do it. And I don't have to jockey for position in my walk. I don't have to fight to get somewhere. I just have to believe that if He said it, He will do it. And if He promised it, I'll get to see it. The next thing is that we wait with expectation. A person of faith waits with expectation. What does it mean to wait with expectation? It means that even in my waiting, I'm looking for something to happen. Even in the middle of standing in the line, I am looking for God to do something. I am looking for God to come through. I am looking for God to deliver, because I believe that it's somewhere in my ability to keep looking that I don't focus on all the wrong things. If I am too busy focusing on looking where He's trying to move and looking for the possibility that maybe, just maybe today is the day He'll show up, I'm not going to focus on all the negative. I'm not going to focus on all the noise. I'm not going to focus on all the natural. What I'm going to put my focus and attention on is that I'm looking at the one who on any given day, at any given moment, in any given situation, could step down and deliver what He promised me. So I have to look with expectation, which means I have to learn to wait around looking for God to show up. I have to wait with expectation that God is going to show up. And I cannot afford to take a day off believing that. Because what if in that one day it was the day He showed up? Or in my day of wanting to walk away, or in my day of doubt, I missed an opportunity to watch God show up in my life and show out in my life. Lastly, in order for us to learn to wait well, we have to see what others can't. We have to see what others can't. Hebrews 11, verse 8 and 9 says, "It was by faith that Abraham obeyed God when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance." Here's the line that I love. "He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents." I love that line. He went without knowing where he was going. He was walking in faith, believing God spoke a word to me, and I'm just going to follow him in my obedience. And I love Hebrews chapter 11. Listen, if you want to get charged up in your faith, read Hebrews 11 every day, right? It's the chapter of faith, but I don't think we get the full context of Hebrews chapter 11 without the book of Genesis. I don't think we can really grab a hold of what's being communicated in Hebrews 11 if we don't take time to read through Genesis and watch what God does. He may not have known where he was going, but he had faith in the one he was following. He may not have known the place that God was ending up for him to go, but he knew for a fact he was following God in the middle of it. And that was all he needed to go on. All he needed was, I am following this God who has spoken to me. I am following Yahweh. I am following this master of mine. And if he told me to go here, that's where I'm going to go. Genesis chapter 15, verse 4, this is what it says. Then the Lord said to him, Abraham, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And the verse that we've talked about the last couple weeks, and Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. How could he not believe God? That any time he stepped out of his tent again and looked up at the sky, he could remember the promise. That every time the sun went down, the promise was up. That every time the sun went down, he could remind himself, I may have had a bad day, but God promised this to me. It may look barren in my tent, but God promised me the stars. He promised everything to me, and all I need to do is fix my gaze. It was a constant reminder for him that every time he looked, he could remember that God spoke. He could remember that God said this to me. It was also a constant reminder that even in my flesh, I could never obtain that. Even in all of my working, I could never lay hold of that. But with God and having faith in him, if he intervenes in this situation, then anything is possible. And all the restraints are off when God gets involved. It was a constant reminder that every time I laid my eyes on the stars that are above my head, it is the reminder that God said it and he will do it for me. That God promised it, which means he will be faithful to come through for me. And I said it last week, I believe it's time for us to dream bigger. I believe it's time for us to hope for more and to dream for more and to believe that God is a lot bigger than what we really think. And we need to learn to get our hopes up and to look for bigger things, because when we step outside of the tent, we can look up at the stars and be reminded that God spoke to me. That even in the barrenness, there's stars in the sky for me to be reminded. And I would venture to say that there are breadcrumbs all over your life. That if we would just pay attention to them, we could remember all that God has promised us and all that God has spoken to us. There have been countless miracles in your life. There has been time and time and time and time again where God has showed up in your life and he's done something for you. It may be a check in the mail. It may be deliverance in your life. It may be the day you got saved. It may be the person you ran into on the street corner. But there have been moments all along the way where God has been showing up for you. And if we will just look back and look outside of our tent, look outside of our situation and remind ourselves, God gave me a promise. So what are those for you? What are those stars in your life? What are those reminders? What are those breadcrumbs that have been placed all along the path that you're walking? That even when everybody else has given up hope, you can look back and you can remember if he did it then. And if he came through for me then he'll do it for me now. Listen, this is what I want you to remember. Moses is writing to the Israelites who are wandering in the desert with what looks like no end in sight. They cannot see the promised land. All they know is that God has delivered them, and He's put them in this wilderness, and He's promising something. And so when Moses is writing this, it is the encouragement to them that this God is trustworthy. And if He gave this promise to Abraham, and you're a descendant of Abraham, then every single night when you lay your head on that pillow and you look up at the stars and you begin to count them, remind yourself that God made a promise, and that this God, who is not like other gods, who is built altogether different, He is trustworthy and He is worth following. And even if Abraham didn't get it right every time, God always delivered what He promised. And in this story, when we get to Genesis 21, after 25 years of waiting, God comes through. Can you imagine being in the wilderness, in the middle of not knowing, did God actually send us here? Are we actually on the right path? It even says that they were quarreling, saying, maybe we should just go back to captivity. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, we have to remind ourselves that God gave me a word. And if God gave me a word, I'm going to fight for that thing. And if I'm going to fight for it, then I've got to be willing to look through the natural and believe that when God intervenes on this, it's going to become something entirely different. That if God gave me a word, that I'm going to be a person who is hopeful. That in every situation, God's going to come through. That even on this day, a random Thursday in the middle of October, right at the very end, that God could show up today. That maybe on a Wednesday night, when kids are waiting to get candy and we're waiting to get home and get them into bed, that maybe, just maybe, that tonight God would show up for your situation. That maybe responding to one more altar call, to one more time of prayer, one more person believing with you and agreeing with you, maybe it's in that moment that God would come through. But we have to be a people of faith that learn to wait well. Because somewhere in the waiting, the eyes get off of me and what I can do, and get on the fact that He's been trustworthy every single time. With every head bowed and eye closed.